You're listening to the Business Tea podcast, where we talk honestly about what it really takes to start and grow a business.
We share practical marketing advice and real conversations that people don't often talk about, shaped by hands-on experience in agencies, growing businesses, and global brands.
We're Sarah
And Ross,
a brother and sister duo.
And whether you have a small or growing business,
You're building something of your own,
or you're just interested in how marketing actually works,
keep on listening. We spoke a lot before about how small business owners or people working within a growing business, or even people actually working in a big marketing team in the corporate world, could feel overwhelmed by marketing and why that might be. But I think that a lot of the time, and we did touch on this before, it's not that they're necessarily bad at marketing or don't know enough about marketing. I think sometimes it can actually be that all of those overwhelming ideas just don't sit within an overarching strategy. So I think today will be a good episode for us to kind of outline what all that noise is in terms of maybe the tactical side of things versus what that would look like in a strategy and why it's important to have that and tie them both together.
Yeah, because I think as a small business, as we said in the last episode, you don't necessarily know what a strategy even is. So for us to talk through this could give some people some insight that they can then take away and apply to their business and give them that confidence that we spoke about.
Yeah, because strategy as well can seem, like we said before, like a daunting word, and that in itself can feel overwhelming. But actually, what we want people to feel is clear. And if you've got a clarity-led strategy, even better, because then you know exactly where you're trying to go, and then you've got something to keep working back from.
Yeah. So in this episode, we are going to be touching on what strategy is versus tactics, what the difference is between them, and also how without a strategy, those tactics can feel very scattered.
And you do feel like you're all over the place, which is probably what actually makes that feeling of overwhelm more prominent.
Yeah. Okay, so question for you. If you were to describe what a strategy is to someone that doesn't know marketing, how would you describe it?
I would describe it as something that's not even necessarily just marketing related. It's a wide overview of where you're trying to head, why that matters, who you're doing it for. So essentially, what your objectives are, who you're trying to target, and what the outcome is that you want. Is there anything that
I don't think so. I think strategies can be really broad or really niche. So like you were saying, yes, there are marketing specific strategies, but I think the best businesses have holistic strategies. And from my experience anyway, working in like corporate teams, it's when you have like the sales, customer service and marketing all come together with product and development or whatever the team's called, and you sit down and work together to create like a united strategy.
Yeah.
Because I feel like with marketing specific strategies, yes, it's those things that you spoke about, but if you're in a small team, you almost need to be able to keep your eye on other teams to know how that all feeds in together.
Yeah, you've almost described there what a business strategy is versus what a marketing strategy is. And whether you work in a big corporate organization or a small business, each one of those will have overarching business goals, which is essentially the business strategy. But marketing need a seat at that table, or you need to have your marketing hat on as a small business owner as well to identify how marketing can fit into that strategically. So whether the objective is we need to grow our customer base, that might be the main objective in a small business and the only objective if you're just starting out. But that might be one of many objectives in a big corporate business, where another strategy might be operations led or cost led, trying to get costs down, or people led, where you've got massive teams of people. So it is, like you say, trying to fit marketing into the business strategy and then taking the business objectives away and thinking, okay, how can marketing actually add value into these objectives?
Yeah, and I think you describing the two ends of the spectrum in terms of like small business strategies versus larger business strategies. There are like foundations that are the same. Like you say, there's almost like basic principles or I guess, like practices that do run throughout both of those. And I think the most important thing, regardless of whether or not you have a simple or a complex strategy, is having that kind of solid foundation that runs really, really well.
At its core then, strategy, whether it's business strategy or marketing strategy, a strategy essentially is what you're trying to do. So objectives, why you're doing it or why that matters, and who you're trying to target or who you're trying to influence. And then they all kind of keep circling back over each other, I think, and link together.
Yeah, and I think as well, a strategy, I think people see it, and I know we'll probably get into this in this episode, but people probably see it as like a one and done thing, whereas a strategy is actually like, it evolves with you and your business. As you hit objectives, things might change. As the market changes, the strategy might change, which we can go into. But I think, like you say, an easy way of thinking about it is almost like if you're driving somewhere, like if you imagine the sat nav or the directions as the strategy, that's where you're going, and the car, the fuel, the food that you're taking with it, they're the tactics.
Yeah, that is a good way of looking at it, actually, because if you got in the car knowing, okay, I want to go on holiday.
Where now?
Where do you want to go? How long will it take you to get there? That will then influence how much fuel you'll need. And then that's the tactics. Are your tyres filled with air? Do you have the right pressure in the tyres? Like,
Look
those
at you.
are the, I don't know. I'm stopping there with the car stuff. That's the tactical part. But the strategy essentially is, okay, you want to go on holiday. That's the objective. How are you going to get there? That's strategic. Why do you want to go there? If you want a hot or a cold holiday, that will define where you're going to go. That's the strategy. And then when you know where you want to go, that's the tactics. Right. Do I have enough petrol in the car? Are my tyres filled up with air? And all of those things that then allow you to get to that place.
I think another analogy
We love an analogy.
would be probably something along the lines of like a recipe. Like if you were looking to do a new dish and you wanted to turn your hand to a new type of cooking, whatever, you would get a recipe book. That is the strategy. And then as you look through that, like you said, that will give you then the ingredients, which is then the tactic, the method, you know. So I think it's important to think about strategy and tactics in that way, because a lot of people will go in straight with the tactics and start thinking, I need to do X, Y, Z. But really, they haven't sat down and said, where am I going on holiday?
On the cooking thing, I do this all the time. So I go to the supermarket and I go around the aisles and I pick things up that I think will make a good meal. So I'll pick up, this honestly is my shopping list every week. Pack of peppers, pack of onions, pack of some sort of meat, maybe a spice because I might not have that in my cupboard, a tin of tomatoes, tomato paste. And then I'll go home and then I'll get to the day that I'm cooking and I look at the ingredients and I'm like, okay, well, what am I going to make with that?
Yeah.
Because I've gone from the tactics of all these separate items without knowing in my mind, right, I'm going to have fajitas for dinner. So actually what I also will need is a packet of
Wraps.
I forgot what they were called. What I actually need is a packet of wraps, a packet of fajita mix, and then all those other little tactical ingredients. Yeah. But without all of them, I can't make fajitas.
Yeah. And it is that whole, like, you pick up things that you like. And I think that's a trap that small businesses and growing businesses get into, because naturally you pick up tomatoes and tomato paste because you think, I love tomato. But do you actually need tomatoes for that recipe? So
no,
in
fajitas,
no,
you don't have tomato paste or tomatoes.
I mean, you're picking it up because you enjoy it. That's the problem.
Or I think it's useful.
Yeah.
Because that is genuinely hand on heart what I do in the shop, and then I get home and it's a chaotic mess because I'm like, I don't know what I'm actually going to make with these.
Yeah, I think it's a really good view on how people approach strategy sometimes.
And also what people are used to getting, because I'm now thinking that way of working in the supermarket, because I'm doing it because I buy those things because that's what I always do. And I've heard that so many times as well in the working world, where it's, we've always done it this way, so let's do it again. Mm-hmm. Or that's what we've done before, we'll do it again. And actually, is that the best way? Who knows if there's no strategy? Because if you don't think higher level and more holistically, you're just going to repeat it.
Yeah, and just, I know I'm sticking with this analogy and you'll be like, what the hell? But like, If you imagine your strategy and your tactics as making food, let's just take it to there for a second. Again, we love food. Imagine your customers or potential customers as the people that you're giving that food to. So you're saying about how in businesses, some people are like, oh, we'll just do the same thing that we've always done. And I think that's where audiences get fatigued and customers switch off, because nowadays customers have such high expectations in terms of like, you don't need a complex strategy, but you need a varied strategy. You need something that will like be in the right places at the right time and say what essentially your prospects need to hear.
Yeah, and that is a really good way of looking at it, because if I were to serve up what
fajitas every day,
either fajitas every day or the meal that I didn't have a clue what I was even going to make with the peppers, onions, tomato paste and tin of tomatoes, and then I served that, the customers would probably be like,
what is this?
Yeah, what is this and why have you served it me? Yeah. I can't even identify what you're trying to put in front of me. We've spoken a lot about analogies, so let's go back to the core of the difference between strategy versus tactics then. So a strategy, I would say, is what you're trying to achieve, so your objectives, why that matters and why you're doing it, and who you're doing that for. And then the tactics, I would summarize as the actions that sit underneath that strategy. So essentially the tactics are how you're going to execute that strategy.
Yeah, so essentially the strategy tells you what matters and the tactics show you how to do that.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say a lot of businesses, as we've said, do go straight in at a tactical level and they action because they think that's productive. But actually doing that, one, makes you feel overwhelmed, like we spoke about in the other episode. But without the strategy overarching that, they don't compound into anything. They don't build towards anything. And that's where I think people can feel a little bit like a headless chicken.
Yeah, and I've seen it, and you've seen it so many times where like a business has a new initiative, say it's a new product or they're strengthening something within their organization, and they will think like, oh, well, we just need to do a little campaign and we need to do a landing page. And it's a really cookie cutter approach of like landing page, a few social posts, we'll do an email out to our existing database and that'll be enough. And it's like, I think realistically, like you were saying, if you scattergun and just go after these small tactics to try and underpin that strategy without doing it the other way round, you're then basically like doing something in isolation and you're not building like a wall of noise, which is what it takes to grow a business.
Yeah, and sometimes working in that way can also impact another area of marketing as well, because what you've just described is at a campaign level, but you might have multiple campaigns running at the same time. So by only thinking at the tactical level and not the level above, which is at strategic level, you could be doing something that might be impacting another campaign that's over here, but without thinking strategically, you're ignoring a whole campaign entirely that you could be cannibalizing the budget for. You could be targeting the same people, so you might need to think about the messaging that those people are going to see if they're then going to see both campaigns. And I think when you are just running at a tactical level and just doing the doing without stepping back, you're going to ignore things like that, which could be a big risk.
Yeah, and I think in the right circumstance, like if you were to have that approach, let's say it's a big business for argument's sake. So like you've got a big budget, you've got a big team, you've got multiple people looking after multiple areas of marketing and business and operations, etc. You can kind of afford to burn a little bit. So you would, I guess, move quickly so that you can learn quickly. But at the same time, that doesn't then feed into the main strategy and objective that you're going after. Does that make sense? So you can move quickly in a way, but it doesn't really get you to where you need to go. You're almost like, going back to the car analogy, you're almost going on short sprints to like random destinations to try and learn what it's all about, rather than focus on the main goal and moving bigger rocks, I guess.
And I think that happens in the larger businesses like you've just described, because marketing sits within a wider team and it's not decided on in isolation. It has input from other stakeholders that aren't marketers, which you have to consider. And that's not a bad thing, because it's good to have wider conversations. But that's why I think you can start to feel like, oh, we're trying to do so many things, but actually this is the big goal that we're trying to also keep in the forefront of our mind. But to that point, small businesses can't afford to do that. And they don't have that, I can't remember how you described it, but
I guess luxury.
Yeah, the luxury of being able to kind of burn time, essentially. Yeah. So it's important at all levels to have a strategy, but even more so for a small business, because they're so much more time poor and are wearing all of those hats in either one person or a small group of people versus a larger business where each person's got their own hat or lane, or however you want to put it.
Yeah. And normally with smaller or grown businesses, there's a second job. So it's like, it's not like it's your full-time dedicated focus. You're normally doing it on weekends and doing it in evenings. So being able to pick it up and drop it is really important. So to have that strategy, like we've got a strategy document that we often refer to. If we start going off on a bit of a tangent and we think, oh, do we actually need that channel or tactic? Hold on, let's go back. Let's see what we're actually trying to do in this area of what we're trying to achieve. And then you always tie it back. So what I'm trying to say is, as a small business, if you've got that, it gives you a jumping off point that you can continue to jump off. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you're picking it up where you left off, essentially, rather than picking up a complete new activity just for the sake of it.
Yeah, and I think that's probably where a lot of small businesses fall down, is that you will sit down on your laptop or on your phone, and then you'll be like, right, what am I doing today? Like, what should I focus on? And then suddenly, like we said in our last episode, you see a trend, you see a new channel, you see a new tactic, and you're like, oh, I'm going to turn my hand at that. And you're like, it's a distraction. It is a distraction.
I think that sort of behaviour as well is what leads to the typical tactical rabbit holes of, let's just quickly test a paid ad. Well, why are you doing that? Who are you trying to target? What's your objective? Are you trying to get reach, awareness, engagement, sales? But I think people just do it to see if paid works, or there's so many different things, like, let's just get an email out. Okay, well, what are you expecting them to do off the back of that email? Why are you emailing them? What other emails will they receive?
And this is something that we hear about all the time with people. Like, when people understand what we do or hear about that we're marketing, they will say to us, can you help me with my paid ads? Can you give me advice on this email that I'm creating? And it's like, when we ask the question, oh, who's it for? What's your goal? Like, what are you trying to actually achieve with it? They then look at us blankly. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. As we say, not a lot of small businesses know about how to write a good strategy. But when we quiz them about it, they don't even really know how to respond.
Yeah. I'm smiling because as you were talking, I'd got an example in my head. And if anyone's listening to this I've worked with in previous roles, they will know exactly what I'm talking about. But as a marketing team, we would get people continuously asking for a brochure, and we would always go back with, okay, why do you want a brochure? And I think people thought that we were just trying to be challenging in terms of we didn't want to do the work, or we just didn't fancy doing a brochure. But actually what we were trying to do was go back and understand the objective first and start from that point, because actually, if you're trying to get sales, a brochure might not be the answer. But if you're trying to educate customers on what it is that we sell, or to understand what we do as a brand or offer as a business, okay, a brochure might be one way of doing that. But what else do we have in our toolkit as a marketing team that we can also do to achieve that? And I think that, yeah, they thought that we were just being challenging for challenging's sake. But what we were trying to do was look at whether that was the best way of achieving what they were trying to achieve with said brochure.
Yeah, it's a good little story, because I have also felt that in corporate marketing for sure. And I think it's probably a growing frustration of other teams when working with marketing, because we would have a simple request form, and it was literally like your name, what you're trying to do, who is it for, basically the core principles of marketing, right? So you would get people fill it out, and then when it's like, who's it for, they just put like clients, or they'd be like new customers. And I think most people approach their strategy with that simplistic mindset of like, oh, well, it's obviously for in branch, it's for events. And then it's like, what is that next layer of who it is actually for? But I don't think people actually sit down or know how to sit down to work out their ideal customer profile.
Yeah, and it also goes back to people not fully understanding what marketing does as a function, because they might not understand why we're asking those questions. But the more detail that we have as a marketing team or person, the more granular we can get with the tactics that we suggest to achieve what you're trying to achieve in the strategy.
Something that I see a lot through the content that we've put out so far as the business tea is that the rabbit holes that small businesses fall down are often things like hashtags. What hashtags should I be using? Do captions actually matter? What metrics are important? What should I be looking at? And I think whilst all that is important, and yes, as we've said previously, you should look at those in the right context, it shouldn't be your primary focus. So when we actually say to them, okay, well, what are you trying to achieve? It's the same thing as the customer profile piece, where it's like, they can't tell us what their core focus is of what they're trying to do.
And that's more important than getting bogged down in how many likes have I got? How many shares have I got? Whilst they're important and good to have visibility of and good to measure and kind of keep an eye on, they're not worth becoming obsessed over, because things like hashtags and those sorts of vanity metrics aren't make or break for your overarching goal.
Yeah. And something that we always ask ourselves is, why is it important?
Yeah.
Why is this important right now? Like, should we actually be focusing on these metrics, this channel, this tactic? What's more important than this right now? And if you've got a list of things that are important and something ranks higher, you should be doing those other things. That's the bottom line.
Yeah.
And I think people think that strategies need to be these really comprehensive mammoth decks of like PowerPoint overload where you've got a single slide to explain a single thing. It's not about that. It's not about having all the terminology and all the charts and things to show what you're trying to achieve. It's at its fundamental, so simple, and people overcomplicate it. And I think it's a typical thing in corporate, and I'm guilty of it as well. You know, like I've fell into that rabbit hole of overcomplicating a strategy, because in my mind, it makes so much sense to include all the detail and all the data and everything that you need to really illustrate that thing. But there's a way of doing this strategy, and normally that is in its simplest, easiest to understand form.
Like you say, it doesn't have to be a deck, and it might be a deck in the corporate world, but it doesn't have to be. It could literally just be in a notepad, bullet points of what you're trying to achieve, what your objectives are, who you're trying to target, why you're doing it, and what good looks like. It doesn't need to be formatted and presented in your brand colours, and that is just time that the strategy would absorb unnecessarily.
Yeah, when you could then be focusing on what's next.
The
now
tactics,
that you've got,
yeah.
Now that you've got your strategy and it is simple, what are you actually going to start working on to then achieve that?
Yeah, and it might be that there is more than one objective. It's probably oversimplifying it if we said one bullet point for each. There might be multiple. What are you trying to achieve? So maybe have it as a column, 3 columns, and then you can try and align them then to the tactics. But it's just getting them down in whatever capacity that is, spreadsheet, notepad, deck, 1 slide per area, but it doesn't need to have loads of time and input into it. As long as you've got that clarity, you've got something to work from.
Yeah. Going back to my point about like complex strategies and like almost overcompensating in that strategic process, I think, and I think you're probably the same, feel free to disagree if you have a different opinion, but a good strategy is normally something that is really simple to understand and straightforward.
Yeah, and I think that's where it can get tricky, because when you're working to a strategy, that's where your decisions should be being reduced down. When people come and maybe influence the strategy, or something happens economically that might influence the strategy, that's where then it gets diluted and you've got more decisions that you need to think about. But that's where it's good to have the strategy, because they're your core decisions already made. Anything outside of that is then a prioritization of, okay, this is the strategy and this is what I'm focusing on and where I've got my time invested currently. Anything outside of that, okay, it might be a priority, but where does that either fit, or what would need to be removed from the strategy in order to facilitate that?
Yeah, it's like a bow. It's literally like a bow. Like, all these separate strands make up the direction that you're going. But if you have too many strands, your bow is going to be too heavy. It's going to be too thick to actually use. So, like, you need to be able to prioritize that strategy, like you say, because it's fine having people or markets or situations influence your strategy, because that's absolutely normal. Like, the amount of times where we've done a strategy at a business and then a competitor launches something, or the market changes really quickly and you need to be able to adapt your strategy fast and be agile, that's absolutely fine. But like you say, you then need to hold it against the core objective and say, okay, where does that then sit alongside what I'm actually trying to do here?
Yeah, the strategy should help you to reduce your decisions. If you're having more decisions added to it, you need to revisit the strategy, which is what you were saying before in terms of the strategy can be evolving. As much as strategy is defining what to do, it is, like we've just said, just as much deciding what not to do as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I do think that once you understand the what and the why, the how then becomes a lot easier to understand.
Yeah, and for each of those new things that happen, you keep going back to the what, the why, then the how comes after, like you say.
Yeah.
But for each different part of that strategy.
Yeah.
I think then by having that, what that unlocks then is, like we said before, if you're feeling overwhelmed or confused, by doing that and working to that process or in that way, things should feel calmer, more aligned with where you're trying to go.
And like more intentional.
Yeah.
Like, if you think about it, if you've set something out that you want to achieve and then you go ahead and do it, there's less of that whole like, oh, why did this work? It's because, well, actually, if you look back then at your strategy, you know exactly why it's worked and how you've got there, because you've mapped that out already.
Yeah, you did it with intent.
And it also gives you less like false starts, because if you start something and then start and then start and stop, you never get that kind of clear picture, and that eventually will lead to that confidence then of knowing what works for your audience and your strategy.
Saying that, I know we've spoken a lot about strategy, but even with the best, most cohesive strategy in the world, there's always going to be distractions and there's always going to be different decisions that come in that will make you need to revisit the strategy or that might impact the strategy.
And I think as a small business, the muscle that you need to train and flex is being able to see those distractions, acknowledge them and be like, great, yeah, I've taken what I need from that. That's it. I'm not going to try and revitalize my whole business with this new initiative or new tactic. I'm going to acknowledge it. I'm going to park it because it doesn't relate to my strategy. And if it does, see if you can leave it in and prioritize it. But generally, see it, spot it, move on. Something
I find all the time with spending a lot of time on social media is trends. That happens to me with trends all the time, because I'm on there with intent because I've either posted a bit of content or I'm researching for my next bit of content. And then suddenly a trend comes up, and like you've said before, it's, oh, okay, well, that seems to be performing well. Everybody's jumping on it. Should I jump on it? Is this the right time for me to do it as well then? And then that's just a big distraction that might not actually serve any purpose for me.
Yeah, but what you should do in that scenario is see it, spot it, sort it. Anyone in the UK will be like, for God's sake. You should see it, capture it somewhere, even if it's a brain dump document, shove it down somewhere, go back to what you were focusing on, because it's so easy. It is a slippery slope. We're all guilty of it. Like,
and we've definitely started putting that into our process now in our Monday board, where we have that area, as you've just described, with a brain dump. Because if I'm the type of person that I can get easily distracted and therefore then procrastinate. So if I am not documenting it like we do and like you've described, I will go off on a tangent and then feel really unproductive, overwhelmed, and then the cycle continues.
You saying about trends, I think that's probably a really good place to take the next episode and to unpack trends in a little bit more detail.
Yeah, I think trends is something that everybody knows what they are or has been impacted by, whether that's just you've seen them or you felt what I've just described in terms of you've seen a trend and you don't know whether to jump on it or not. So yeah, I think it would be a good one to talk about. And in relation to what we've spoken about today, maybe how they're not so good when you do have a strategy, because sometimes they can sort of derail you a little bit as well. So I think that would be good to unpack.
Yeah, and how to use trends effectively. So of those that are beneficial, like you said, how do you then adapt it into your brand and I guess into your strategy?
Yeah, because they could be useful, but it's knowing how they could be useful, and if they're not, how they also could undo your strategy and the good work that you've done there as well. So to summarise, I feel like to wrap this up, essentially what we're saying is you don't need more tactics and you don't need to do more. You just need clarity in a strategy. Is that fair?
I think that's a good way of putting it, for sure. If anything that we've spoken about in this episode has been useful and you've taken anything away from it, do follow us, subscribe, leave us a review. It really does help. Not just us, but other people like you to help them join our conversation.
Just to provide a little bit of reassurance, because I did this in the last episode.
I feel like it's becoming a common theme.
It is, I think. Maybe this is how I'll end every episode. But if you have resonated, just to provide some reassurance, you're not behind, you're not bad at marketing, you maybe just needed a little bit of clarity and structure. So hopefully this conversation has provided a little bit of that, or if nothing else, made you feel a little bit less alone. So if you have enjoyed this episode, then we would love to see you next time.